I restored her cherished toy. I had no clue her mother commanded the most feared dynasty in the galaxy. There's exactly one other person I've told this to. A Federation Records official who came by my shop with a notepad and a great deal of patience, and stayed almost 4 hours. I gave her the condensed version. She said the full account was what she'd actually come for. I insisted the condensed version was all I had. That wasn't entirely accurate. The full account starts on a Tuesday, in the 43rd year of my posting at Kethasamiran Way Station, a transfer point, orbiting a hazy gold gas moon called Val, far out at the edge of the Kethos system. If you've never seen Kethasamiran, it's exactly what it looks like. A corridor, nothing more than a place ships pass through. Roughly 400 people call it home, and all of them exist to keep that corridor open and running. Fuel handlers, arrival clerks, a modest clinic, a customs officer named Sath, 22 years at the same post, who knows every crack in the transit statutes by heart, and myself, Sail Dunor, 49 years old. For 31 years I've run a precision repair shop out of Commercial Annex 7, part of the Kethasamiran Ring. It's a narrow, elongated space, topped with an actual glass skylight, original to the station's construction 400 years back. Not a modern replacement panel. When Velruth's orbit aligns just right, its dusty gold light slants through that skylight and paints the whole shop the color of old bone. I've spent enough hours beneath that light that I now associate it with sharp focus. My finest repair work happens when it's angled low. I fix broken things. That's really the entire job. Navigation gear, medical scanners, resonance tuning tools, Federation beacon housings, family keepsakes. Nobody manufactures spare parts for anymore, since the original makers shut down decades back. Whatever someone brings me gets repaired. Fairly pre-said, no small talk involved. Among the station's long-term residents, my shop has earned a reputation as the last resort, where you go once nothing else has worked. 10 minutes with an object, and I'll either state the problem in one line or return it in silence. Either response, people have learned, carries meaning. I didn't get into this line of work out of any burning passion. Not originally. I simply had a talent for it, reading how vibration moves through a structure, how a material bends under uneven pressure, understanding which tolerances genuinely matter, and which don't. My father repaired agricultural measuring devices on a frontier moon called K. I spent 12 years of my childhood at his elbow, watching. He told me once that a merely competent craftsperson understands how something was designed to function, while a genuinely good one understands how it actually functions in practice, and those two things don't always line up. I've mulled that sentence over for 37 years now. I still believe he was correct. The girl turned up one morning, early in the 4th month. That stretch when Velruth's orbit brings it closest, and the light through my skylight runs at its brightest. I'd already been at my bench since before 5th hour, tracking down an intermittent fault in a bioscanner's tertiary resonance circuit. The fault only showed itself because the circuit was heat-sensitive, misbehaving only once the unit had been running past 2 hours. I'd spent 3 straight mornings building a temperature-controlled box just to reproduce the fault deliberately. That morning, it finally did. I had both arms buried in the scanner's casing, deep in what I'd call good silence. Not empty-headedness, but sharpened focus, when I caught something at the door. I didn't look up right away. People wander in and out constantly. A shape at the threshold doesn't always demand instant attention. I gave the fault another couple of minutes, pinned it down, and only then raised my head. A small child stood at the entrance, barely reaching my waist. Warm golden tan skin, the tone common to Velkasari people. Silver hair hanging loose past pointed ears. Her eyes were a deep honeyed amber, with a quality that seemed to glow outward, rather than simply catch the light, the way certain polished stones do. Her outfit had clearly once been elegant, now worn ragged from travel, pale cream fabric with copper thread edging, frayed at collar and hem, sleeves rolled up because it was sized for someone larger. She held something pressed to her chest with both hands, gripping it with the wary tension of someone carrying something fragile they weren't entirely confident they could keep safe. "Come on in," I said. She hesitated, then stepped forward in 3 careful movements to the counter, holding the object out. I set my tool down and took it from her hands. It was a small carved figure, 6-legged, low and crouched, about the length of my palm from nose to tail. Old, careful craftsmanship. Each leg caught mid-stride, as though the creature had been frozen between two movements. The material looked like polished, well-cast bone, that faint waxy sheen, distinguishing it from synthetic composite, smoothed by years of being handled. A row of shallow etched lines ran along its spine, formal, deliberate, resembling a personal name mark. Tilting it, I could sense a resonance mechanism inside without even opening the case, a faint hint of sound, not a full note, just its echo. It stopped singing. Tay girl sighed. Her voice was small and level, carrying the rounded vowels and precise consonants typical of Velkhazari speech. I held it up toward the skylight, turning it slowly. "How long has it been broken?" "Since we left," she said. I registered that phrasing. "Not since we arrived somewhere, since we left somewhere." "How long have you had it?" "Always," she answered immediately, with the flat certainty children use for things they consider obvious. I set it on the counter and reached for my inspection lens. Honor figures of this kind are given to Velkhazari infants at their naming ceremony, meant to stay with them permanently. Whoever built this one clearly knew the craft. The joints were tension-fitted rather than glued, which meant I could open it without risking damage. I found the 4 release catches and triggered them in order. The body opened along a horizontal seam. Inside sat the resonance chamber. These toys operate like any bone and membrane wind instrument. Breath passing over a vibrating crystal membrane produces the sound. A properly functioning Vonner produces a 3-note chord. The notes staggered slightly, so they arrive as a ripple instead of all at once. The sound carries well on a still day. A working one can be heard from roughly 40 meters. This membrane had cracked a clean diagonal fracture running about 2/3 across. Not shattered, cleanly split along a stress line, the kind of damage a hard knock or sudden pressure shift causes. Discoloration along the edges told me it had been broken for several weeks already. I shut the case. "This can be fixed." She watched me with those amber eyes, showing no relief, more like she'd already assumed as much, and my words were simply confirming a conclusion she'd reached beforehand. "How long will it take?" "The membrane needs replacing. I don't keep natural Velcast crystal in stock, but I have a Federation composite that's acoustically close. Within a small margin, I can finish it by morning. If you want the exact original tone matched precisely, that's a full day of work." "It needs to be exact," she said, "the exact sound." I noted that request. Most people just want it functioning again. She wanted precision. "Come back tomorrow, before the light shifts. It'll be ready." She gave one measured nod, that same economical gesture I'd already noticed, and turned to leave. "I'll need a deposit," I said, not because the repair was costly, but because I don't take on work from strangers without one. She stopped, turned back, and set a small gray stone on the counter, smooth, polished, marked with a pale diagonal streak. "A Velos Promise stone." "That's a return token," I said. "I know," she answered. "It means I'll come back 10. Selef." I stood there holding the broken figurine, turning the stone over in my mind. A Velkhazari child, alone on a transfer station, carrying a broken naming gift, familiar enough with an old custom to use its token as security. I kept circling that phrase, "since we left," and the fact she'd sought out my shop specifically, bypassing the general vendors, the listed repair services, customs, the clinic. She'd come straight to me. I've never advertised. The long-timers here just know where to find me. I set the broken toy under full-spectrum light on my stand and headed to the composite cabinet. 20 minutes of searching turned up a Federation-certified Class 7 acoustic composite, normally used in beacon membranes, within a couple % of natural crystal for this range. I cut a new membrane to size, mounted it on the bone frame, and spent the rest of the day tuning it. Getting a Vonner's tone precisely right takes real time. The chord comes from the membrane, interacting with 3 internal channels of differing length, each note carrying its own decay rate, all 3 needing to stay balanced. Off even slightly, and it sounds wrong in a way most people can't name but notice anyway, like a door that hasn't quite clicked shut. I used my calibration gear, but trusted my ear more. 17 separate tension adjustments later. As the light shifted toward evening, I finally landed on a chord I was satisfied with. I sealed the case, locked the fittings, and blew across the intake vent. The chord came out clean, 3 notes, rippling outward, the middle one arriving just ahead of the others. The traditional Velkazari phrasing, filling the room with a clarity sharp enough to stop me mid-motion. There was something in it I couldn't quite name. Not merely accurate, right, in a way where anything less precise would have felt like a falsehood. I locked it away in the safe, put my tools up, and went home for the night. She was already waiting the next morning before I'd even unsealed the door, standing at the end of the corridor with that same patient stillness, as though she'd been there a while and didn't mind waiting longer still. I let her in and retrieved the figurine, but didn't hand it over right away. Before I give this back, I want you to hear something. I blew across the intake. The cord filled the room. She went completely still, not her usual calm stillness, but something closer to shock, as though the sound had struck her physically. Something shifted behind her eyes, the way a shuttered room changes when a window suddenly opens. She released a slow breath and held out both hands. I placed the Vonner into them. She held it the same careful way as before, but the tension had changed. No longer the strain of holding something fragile and broken, but the ease of holding something whole again. She raised it slightly and blew across the intake herself, gently, with the controlled breath of someone who'd done this many times before. The cord came out identical. Clean. Correct. She lowered it, closed her eyes briefly, not to steady herself, but as if confirming something, then opened them again. The pitch, she said. Not a question. A statement. Class 7 Federation composite. It'll hold up fine under normal use. If it cracks again, the same repair applies. Any shop with mineral composite stock can handle it. But you tuned it yourself. I did. She studied the figurine. Then, me. By ear. Not just the calibration tool. I didn't answer right away. It's rare for anyone to read my process, that precisely rarer still from a child I'd exchanged maybe 50 words with in total. In 31 years, no customer had ever pointed out that specific distinction. The tool gives you the note, I said eventually. The ear gives you the chord. She weighed that carefully. The note is correct. The chord is right. Those aren't the same standard. No, I agreed. They're not. She reached into her clothing and produced a second stone, flat, pale gold, the shade of Velkazari mineral deposits, and set it beside the first. For the tuning, she said, 2 stones now. 2 different traditions. Both left with me. You don't owe extra for that, I said. Tuning's part of the same job. I know, she said. These aren't payment. Then she left again. I stood there with both stones, replaying her words. The note is correct and the chord is right. Not the same standard. I tucked them into my breast pocket, where I keep small things I intend to think about further. 4 days passed before her third visit, this time without the toy. I was deep into a navigational array repair, at the stage where interruption costs real momentum. I'm in the middle of something, I said. I know. I don't mind waiting. She took the stool along the south wall, sat straight-backed, hands folded, watching with the kind of focus that comes from genuine interest, not boredom. I worked another 90 minutes. At one point, hands occupied, I noticed her reach over and set a probe tool onto the rail unasked exactly where I'd have placed it myself. She'd clearly watched closely enough to know. When I finally stopped, I asked, "What brings you here today?" "Nothing in particular." I wanted to watch. "Why?" "Because you work like my mother does," she said. "Like nothing else exists while you're doing it." I had no reply to that. "Fine by me," I said, and turned back to my bench. She stayed 2 more hours. When she finally left, there was no farewell, just a nod and the door closing behind her. 31 years running this shop, and I'd never once wanted an apprentice. Yet here I'd just spent 2 quiet, comfortable hours with a child I'd barely spoken 100 words to in total. That evening, I set both stones on the shelf above my counter, and left them there. 6 days after her third visit, 3 syndicate operatives arrived on the station, posing as ordinary transit passengers. I clocked one of them because he came into my shop that first morning, medium height, Velkazari coloring, but darker, built like someone accustomed to years of outdoor labor. Plain dark travel jacket. No markings. He set a small resonance scanner on my counter, the kind used for property identification. Every properly tuned Vonner emits a distinct frequency signature. One such scanners can match against a registered owner. Needs calibrating, he said. Reading half a step flat, Primera picked it up. It wasn't flat at all. It was reading exactly correct. I noted the emblem stamped into its back, a private recovery house crest, not government, not compact enforcement. What were you scanning when it showed flat? Cargo check. I set it down and thought it through. A property mode scanner picks up any registered resonance object within roughly 60 meters. A properly tuned, registered Vonner counts as a locatable asset under Valkazari property law. I thought about the cord, about the 17 careful adjustments, about how the composite's density differed just slightly from natural crystal, close enough to sound right, but not identical in output frequency. I ran a quick 3-minute calibration check and handed it back. Fixed. The tertiary oscillator was slightly off. It'll read true now. He paid without comment and left. I sat motionless at my bench for a good 5 minutes after that. The scanner had never actually been misreading. It simply hadn't located what it was searching for on this station. A Vonner tuned to true natural crystal frequency broadcasts at 847.3 Hz. I was fairly certain that was the exact figure named in whatever warrant this crew carried. The one now in the girl's possession broadcast at 847.9 Hz instead. I'd tuned it by ear, not strictly by instrument. My calibration tool had only confirmed I was within a small margin of standard, not that I'd landed precisely on 847.3. I hadn't shifted the frequency deliberately. It shifted because the chord demanded it at 847.9. The decay across all 3 notes balanced more cleanly. That balance made it the right sound. And right was exactly what she'd asked for. I crossed to my precision frequency analyzer, Federation scientific grade, accurate to 1/100th of a hertz. I pulled the workshop log, checked the tension figures I'd recorded, and ran the math against the composite's known density profile. 847.9 Hz. I sat with that number for a long while. Then I retrieved my copy of the Valkazari House Property Code and found the section governing resonance object recovery warrants. Section 14. Article 3. A recovery warrant must state the target's exact broadcast frequency to 2 decimal places, and that stated figure must fall within 1/10th of a hertz of the object's true output for the warrant to be legally enforceable. 847.3 versus 847.9, a gap of 0.6 of a hertz. I read that clause 3 separate times. What I'd actually done was fix a broken toy, tune a membrane by ear, because ear tuning is what gives you a proper chord. What resulted through craftsmanship, rather than intent, was a Vonner sitting 0.6 of a hertz beyond the range any warrant could legally reach. I still didn't know who the girl was, or a mother, only that she was Valkazari, that she'd fled somewhere, that her toy had to be exact, and that she'd recognized careful work and kept returning to watch it unfold. That was reason enough to act. I found her that afternoon in the station's rear commons, a dim side corridor near the Annex Junction. The kind of place with no vendor traffic where people go to avoid being seen. She sat with her back against the wall, the toy resting in her lap. I sat down across from her. 3 agents landed yesterday. I think they're hunting you, tracking the toy's frequency. She looked at me, unafraid, more like someone who'd long expected this, and was only now learning someone else knew it too. No? Pero no. The one I repaired reads 847.9 Hz. My guess is their warrant name's 847.3. Those numbers don't match. She fell quiet. You changed it. I tuned it. 847.9 is the correct pitch for this instrument. 847.3 was what the cracked crystal produced before, and a cracked membrane never plays true. I paused. Their warrant is chasing the wrong number entirely. She processed that fast, silently, not visibly thinking, just already knowing. So the warrant can't hold, she said. Not against a frequency it doesn't actually name. Not under Section 14, Article 3. I checked myself. She held my gaze a long moment. Why? A real question. Why would a repair shop operator bother digging into property law belonging to a house she'd never even heard of? I thought of the stones on my shelf, of her 90 minutes on that stool, of the tools she'd shifted without being asked, at exactly the right moment. Because you asked for the exact sound, I said, and I gave it to you. Nobody should get tracked down because of something I fixed. She pulled the toy closer to her chest. Something crossed her face, small, precise, like a sliver of light through a barely open door. Then it was gone. There's something I need to tell you, she said. Primera, Gua, Eited. My mother is the Velkasari Navigator Sovereign. She said it flatly, like reporting the weather. They call her the Quiet Coast. She's held the primary Velkasari trade lanes for 19 years without once yielding ground. She ended 2 house conflicts simply by sitting at a table in silence until the other side realized she'd still be sitting there a century from now, and they wouldn't. She held my eyes steadily. Those agents answer to hurt or used to. There's a succession conflict underway. I said nothing for a moment. I thought about that once fine, now travel-worn garment, about the etched marks along the toy spine, which finally made sense. Then you need the station's duty officer, I told her. Not me. I need both. He'll need someone to confirm the frequency discrepancy. You already knew this law before you ever walked through my door. She met my eyes. I knew an ER tuner would shift the frequency. I knew a shift past 1/10 of a hertz would void the warrant. I knew Annex 7 had a scientific-grade analyzer. A brief pause. I've been on this station 3 months. I've read the compact statutes, the Velkasari property code, every registered business filing here. I've been waiting for someone I could actually trust. Another short pause. The sound it made when you handed it back. That's what told me you were the one. I stayed quiet a while. 31 years running a station workshop, and I'd never once been anyone's destination. I'd always been a tool, reliable, precise, but still a tool that had always felt like enough. All right, I said finally. Let's go find the duty officer. Sath had worked Checkpoint 14 for 22 years, 61 years old, and the single hardest person to rattle I'd ever met. He looked between the girl, me, the property code I'd brought, the workshop log, with its tension figures and frequency math. He said nothing for a long stretch. So, you're claiming the warrant's dead because the frequency's off. Warrant says 847.3. Object reads 847.9. Statute allows 1/10 of a hertz margin. This is 6/10 outside that, and you've got it all on record. The analyzer reading from this afternoon. My repair log from the day I fixed it. The frequency math run against the composite's known density specs. He looked at the girl. You're the Navigator Sovereign's daughter. Yes. He pulled out the station's official record tablet, compact stamped, signature authorized, and opened it, looking my way. You understand, once I log this, it becomes a compact matter. The agents get notified. There'll be a formal hearing. You'll have to appear. Understood. I repaired the instrument. My log confirms it. My shop confirms it. The instrument itself confirms it. That's simply what happened. I paused. I'll appear at as many hearings as it takes. Something crossed his face I hadn't seen there before, not quite surprise, more the look of a man recalculating something he hadn't planned for. He turned back to the tablet and began writing. 3 days passed while the compact notification processed and the agents were formally informed. On the second day, the lead agent returned no scanner this time, just the warrant itself, which he set down on my counter. Standard laminated Velkasari house format, crest stamped, the frequency clause stated plainly. Primary resonance signature 847.3 Hz. Tolerance plus or minus 0.1 Hz. You filed a frequency dispute. I filed a compact record notification. That frequency's standard for natural Velkas crystal, but this object isn't Velkas crystal anymore. It's Federation Class 7 composite, fully documented in my repair log. Different density profile, produces a higher base frequency at equal tension compared to natural crystal. I paused. Your warrant was written for a crystal membrane. What you're actually chasing now has a composite one. Different material, different figure. He held my gaze for a long stretch, weighing it all, whether this was a genuine technicality or a manufactured one, whether it would survive a formal hearing, whether pursuing it further was worth his house's resources. Primera held steady. 31 years of exacting benchwork teaches you to hold a level gaze while your mind is entirely elsewhere, weighing tolerances. Eventually, he picked the warrant back up and walked out. The formal hearing happened at a regional adjudication center 14 days after that. I brought the workshop log, the frequency reading, the material documentation, and the code section marked at 14:3. I testified for 11 minutes. The adjudicator asked for questions. The House's advocate asked too. The ruling came down clean. A warrant cannot execute against an object reading more than 1/10 of a hertz from its stated frequency. Substituting Federation composite for natural crystal was a documented material change made before the warrant's filing. The warrant was void from the outset. I flew home that same day. 6 hours in transit, a meal at the departure lounge, a technical journal on composite membrane fabrication I'd been meaning to get to 4 months. Bake at Kaitos. The pale gold light was slanting through the skylight once more. I sat at my bench, picked up the next item in queue, a beacon housing needing its oscillator replaced, and got back to it. Through those 3 days away, she'd stayed at the shop uninvited, arriving each morning right at 5th hour, taking her usual stool, watching. I kept handing her small tasks, holding parts steady, calling off measurements, clearing tools from the bench. She never needed telling twice. On the second evening, she asked, "What will you do once this is over?" Same thing. Keep working. Don't you want something more than this? I set my tool down and genuinely considered it. A sincere question, asked directly, because she actually wanted an answer. This shop sits inside a corridor. Broken things come through, fixed things leave. That's a real function. If I do it well enough, for long enough, some percentage of everything passing through this corridor works better than it would have otherwise. I paused. That's not nothing. She thought about that. My mother says something similar about the trade lanes. They're corridors too. Keep them open and clear, and a percentage of what passes through actually arrives. A pause. She used to just do it quietly. She didn't used to say it out loud. I turned that over. This toy, I said, the sound it makes when it's right, is that the true original tone, or just close to it? I don't know, she admitted. I've had it since before I can remember. But it feels right. I nodded. That was roughly the answer I'd expected. The Navigator Sovereign arrived on the 5th day. I was at my bench mid-morning when the concourse fell silent in a way that wasn't the ordinary lull of light traffic. It was the silence of everyone's attention converging all at once. Through the open doorway, at the far end of the annex, stood 3 figures. 2 compact escort officers, stationed there since Sath filed the record. And someone else, entirely. She was tall, unusually so, even by Velkazari standards. The same warm gold coloring as her daughter, but scaled the way a mountain relates to the chalk beneath it. Same substance, a completely different magnitude. Silver hair pulled back, the same honeyed amber eyes, but hers carried the stillness of deep water, not cold, just too far down for the surface to disturb. A formal transit mantle in dark copper and cream, she moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who's never once needed urgency to signal importance. The girl stepped out to meet her, crossing the floor at her usual unhurried pace. They stopped 3 meters apart. The Sovereign studied her daughter for a long moment. "You're well." "Yes." "You found somewhere safe." "Yes." Her gaze then shifted, deliberately, toward the workshop doorway. Toward me, taking me in with that same exacting attention I'd already come to recognize in her daughter. "The repair shop," she said. "Not a question." "Yes." "My daughter tells me you tuned it by ear." "The instrument gives you the note," I told her. "The ear gives you the chord." She paused. "They've called me the Quiet Coast for 19 years, because I've held the trade lanes by staying still and waiting for the right moment. My daughter says you work the same way." A beat. She rarely says that about anyone. I had no reply to that. I was fully aware I stood in a 40 square meter repair shop, addressing the woman who controlled the Velkasari primary lanes, and that the right move was silence, letting the moment settle on its own. She reached into her mantle and produced another stone, the same pale gold as her daughter's, but larger, with a single etched line marking its underside, her house sigil. She extended it to me. "For the work already done, and for whatever comes next. This station now falls under Velkazari lane protection." You won't be troubled by recovery warrants here again. I accepted the stone. Warm, smooth, heavier than its size suggested. She held my gaze a moment longer, the same way her daughter always had, as if every part of me were visible and being recorded precisely. Then, she inclined her head once. With quiet dignity, she took her daughter's hand, and together they turned toward the gate. At the junction, the girl glanced back. No wave, just the Wohner lifted slightly, held against her chest with both hands. For half a second, across 40 meters of station corridor, I thought I heard it, the three-note chord rippling faintly, the middle note arriving early, 847.9 hertz. The exact sound. Then, they were gone. I returned inside and set the sovereign stone on the shelf beside the other two. 3 stones from 2 people, each one carrying its own true meaning. The gray one, I'll come back. The pale gold one, for the tuning. This newest one, for the work still ahead. I picked the calibration tool back up, glanced at the weighting component in the stand, and set the tool down once more. I stood there a moment in that low, bone-pale light slanting through the skylight at that particular hour. I thought about the gap between a note and a chord, about how a cracked membrane can never produce a true pitch, and how that holds just as true beyond instruments as within them, about how 31 years spent inside a corridor amounts, in the end, to something real. Then I picked the tool up again, and returned to my work.